Tom Aspinall is about to live through yet another major chapter of his journey as the UFC heavyweight champion. On October 25th, he will defend his belt against Cyril Gaetje in Abu Dhabi, inside the Etihad Arena, as the headliner of UFC 321. The fight is expected to shake up the MMA world, as it puts two highly technical, agile, and dangerous athletes face to face in one of the sport's heaviest and most traditional divisions. But while his immediate attention is fixed on Gaetje, Aspinall already has in mind who could be his next opponent, should he manage to keep the title. That's because, on the preliminary card of the very same event, a crucial matchup for the division will take place: Alexander Volkov versus Jailton Almeida. For many analysts, that fight represents, in practice, an unofficial eliminator to determine the next title challenger, and Aspinall himself shares that vision. In an interview with Bloody Elbow, the Englishman was straightforward. "That's how I see it, and I think that's pretty obvious." According to the champion, this clash will define the immediate future of the heavyweight division. Aspinall also broke down the fight from a technical standpoint, pointing to Alexander Volkov as the favorite. The Russian is already a familiar name to the champion. Back in March 2022, at UFC London, Aspinall submitted Volkov in decisive fashion, solidifying himself at the time as one of the division's brightest prospects. Now, however, the Englishman sees his old foe in excellent form. He even commented on Volkov's last fight against Cyril Gaetje, which took place at UFC 310 in December 2024. When he lost via split decision, honestly, I actually thought Volkov won that fight against Gaetje. I think Volkov is in great shape right now. I think Almeida is good. I haven't seen enough of Almeida's game to really say how good he is. At this moment, it's hard to tell, but I would favor Volkov in that fight. The champion's opinion shows two things. First, that he respects Jailton Almeida's talent, but does not yet see him on Volkov's level. And second, that he views the Russian as a real threat to his dominance, should they face each other again in the near future. What's curious is that Aspinall's future in 2025 could have looked very different. The expectation was that he would face Jon Jones in a heavyweight unification superfight later this year. However, in June, Jones shocked the world by announcing his retirement. The decision came as a blow not just to fans, but also to Dana White, who reportedly had a nearly finalized deal that would have paid Bones around $30 million to fight Aspinall. To add even more controversy, just days later, Jones backtracked and declared he plans to fight again, but only in June 2026. At the historic event the UFC is planning at the White House. Frustrated with the turnaround, Dana White made it clear that Jones will not be allowed to appear on that special card, effectively shutting the door on any potential comeback appearance there. With this uncertainty, the heavyweight division continues to move forward. If Aspinall can get past the extremely tough Cyril Gaetje, all signs point to the winner of Volkov versus Jailton Almeida being next in line. Of course, in MMA, nothing is ever guaranteed. Changes in plans, injuries, and behind-the-scenes negotiations can shift the path at any moment. But for now, Aspinall's prediction seems to make perfect sense. His future rival will most likely be decided in the very same octagon where he'll put his belt on the line, on a night that promises to be historic for the UFC. The saga over who will be Ilia Topuria's next opponent in the UFC continues to spark debates, speculation, and plenty of controversy. Ever since the Spaniard knocked out Charles Oliveira at UFC 317 and reached glory across two divisions, fans and analysts have been trying to predict the champion's next move. Among the most talked about possibilities are Paddy Pimblett, Arman Tsarukyan, and Justin Gaethje, each with their own arguments and groups of supporters inside and outside the octagon. Topuria reached the top with a devastating style and unshakable confidence, making any opponent choice hugely impactful on the UFC landscape. As usual, the organization seems split in its thinking. The face-off between Topuria and Pimblett gave weight to the narrative that the Englishman might be selected, boosted by his popularity and ticket-selling power. Tsarukyan, meanwhile, stands out as the most logical option from a sporting perspective, since many, including Islam Makhachev, believe he is the most deserving contender. But Justin Gaethje emerges as a genuine wildcard, especially after the American floated retirement and voiced his desire for one last big challenge. In this scenario, several influential voices have spoken out. Michael Bisping has already said that, to him, Pimblett is the most obvious challenger. Makhachev, on the other hand, has pushed for Tsarukyan, and now more recently, it was the turn of Michael Chiesa, a veteran welterweight, to come out in direct support of Justin Gaethje. During his appearance on the Bonefire podcast, hosted by Mike Bone, Chiesa explained his point of view about who deserves the next title shot. For him, despite Gaethje's loss to Max Holloway in the historic UFC 300 back in 2024, that should not be used against the former interim champion. What matters, according to Chiesa, is everything Gaethje has already delivered to the sport and to the organization. In his words, the defense was emphatic. There are people saying it's going to be Paddy. I've heard it might be Paddy, and I've heard it might be Justin. For me as a fighter, a big part of me feels like, you know what? Give Justin Gaethje the title fight. Because we're only going to have him around for a little while longer. He took a huge risk when he fought Max. Whether the UFC promised him something or not, nobody knows the truth except Justin. But you know what? Just give him the fight. He deserves it. He earned it with his blood. He earned it with his effort, with everything he gave us and left in the octagon. He gave us things he'll never get back. Just give him the fight. The fight with Paddy will always be there because they've got youth on their side. Justin Gaethje doesn't. Chiesa's argument reflects not only recognition of Gaethje's career, but also an emotional appeal to the legacy the fighter has built. Known as the Highlight, Gaethje has cemented himself as one of the most thrilling fighters in recent UFC history, delivering bloody battles, knocking out elite opponents, and starring in wars that fans will never forget. For Chiesa, that dedication deserves to be rewarded with one final golden opportunity. Meanwhile, Ilia Topuria seems more interested in stirring things up outside the octagon than in defining his title defense. The Spaniard has directed his energy toward an unexpected rivalry with Terence Crawford, the current undisputed super middleweight boxing champion, after his win over Canelo Alvarez. Even before Crawford's triumph over the Mexican star, El Matador was already targeting him, and after the victory, he escalated the trash talk even further. Topuria even used social media to drop a bold prediction about a possible clash between them inside the ring. I'm not going to talk about what would happen between me and Crawford in an octagon. I'm going to talk about what would happen in a ring. I put him to sleep on first contact, he wrote on X. This shift of attention toward boxing only adds to the uncertainty surrounding his next UFC title defense. After all, while Topuria chases a multi-million-dollar fight outside the promotion, the lightweight division is waiting to see who will actually get the honor, or misfortune, of facing him first as champion. If it's up to Chiesa, the answer is clear. Justin Gaethje deserves that chance. Not just because of results, but because of everything he represents to the sport. Now it remains to be seen whether the UFC will heed this call, or instead follow a more commercial route by choosing Paddy Pimblett, or a more technical path by betting on Arman Tsarukyan. One thing is certain, no matter who it is, Ilia Topuria's next fight promises to be explosive. Alexander Volkanovski has reclaimed his throne in the UFC featherweight division and is now looking forward to his first defense of this second reign. After Ilia Topuria vacated the belt, the Australian stepped up at UFC 314 in April and defeated Diego Lopes with a performance worthy of his prime, showing that he is still far from being done inside the octagon. With the title back in his hands, the natural expectation is that Volkanovski's next challenger will be England's Lerone Murphy, who scored an impressive knockout over Aaron Pico this past August at UFC 319. Undefeated and on the rise, Murphy has been consolidating himself as an inevitable name in the division. But even though the Englishman is widely considered next in line, one UFC veteran believes the biggest obstacle to Volkanovski's reign isn't Murphy, but rather an old acquaintance, Diego Lopes, the very opponent the Australian defeated just 5 months ago. This past Saturday, Lopes returned to the octagon and shined once again, submitting Gin Silva at Noche UFC and regaining momentum after his title fight loss. The performance restored his standing as one of the division's top names and strengthened his campaign for a rematch. The one defending this idea with enthusiasm is Michael Chiesa. The former fighter and current UFC analyst emphasized that, while fresh matchups are always attractive, the Brazilian represents the most dangerous test for Volkanovski. In an interview, Chiesa stated, "For the time we still have with Volkanovski, I think we want new fights. I think Lerone Murphy stamped his passport, honestly. Being undefeated in main events in the UFC, and taking that fight on only 3 weeks' notice at UFC 319, going through a tough weight cut and facing Aaron Pico, who's very dangerous. That's a huge credit." Then he made sure to highlight the Brazilian. "I'm a huge fan of Diego Lopes. I think the biggest challenge for Volkanovski isn't Lerone Murphy. I think the biggest challenge for Volkanovski will be Diego Lopes, because he pushed him so hard in that first fight. A fighter of Diego Lopes' caliber only comes back better after a loss when he's still in his prime. He's been spending time training at Oklahoma State Wrestling, and honestly, I think the most dangerous fight for Volkanovski right now is that rematch with Lopes." Chiesa's remarks reinforce the idea that Diego Lopes not only bounced back quickly from defeat, but came back even sharper and more dangerous. At 29, in the peak of his physical and technical prime, the Brazilian has already become a fan favorite and could indeed pose a significant threat to Volkanovski's reign if he gets another shot. On the other side, Lerone Murphy, regarded as the clear #1 contender, didn't take kindly to Chiesa's assessment and made sure to voice his disagreement on social media. The Englishman, undefeated with a 17-0 record, made it clear that he sees no reason for Lopes to jump the line so soon and defended his rightful position as the next challenger. In a direct response to the comparisons, Murphy wrote, "Diego was amazing against Silva, but it doesn't change much in a rematch with Volk. People want to see fresh matchups. I'm 17-0 for a reason. It's my time." The clash of opinions only heightens the anticipation around the featherweight division's future. While Volkanovski waits for his next opponent to be decided, the pressure mounts between two narratives: Lerone Murphy's legitimacy as an undefeated contender seeking his first title shot, and Diego Lopes' resurgence, showing evolution and pushing for a rematch. Whichever direction the UFC chooses, one thing is clear: Alexander Volkanovski is still a champion determined to prove his greatness, and both Murphy and Lopes represent thrilling challenges for this new chapter of his career. A staggering figure came to light after the super fight between Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford, one that shook not only the boxing world but also triggered inevitable comparisons with the UFC. This past Saturday, Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas hosted the biggest boxing event of the year. Canelo, the Mexican icon and multi-division champion, faced Terence Crawford for the undisputed super middleweight title. Despite entering as the underdog, having to move up several weight classes, Crawford delivered one of the finest performances of his career, defeating Canelo by unanimous decision and becoming the new undisputed champion of the division. The fight not only altered boxing history, but also shattered viewership records. According to numbers released days later, the bout became the most watched men's title fight of the century, highlighting just how monumental this clash was for the sport. However, the aspect that drew the most attention was financial. The event also marked the official launch of TKO Boxing, Dana White's new boxing-focused venture, with the UFC president stepping onto the stage during Fight Week as the sport's newest promoter. During press conferences, White was asked about the company's plans and whether there was an intention to change boxing structure, especially regarding the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, a law that protects fighters from exploitative practices by promoters and managers, a protection that, notably, does not exist in the UFC. Even with the law still in place in boxing, the purses for Canelo and Crawford were astronomical. The Mexican reportedly earned at least $100 million, while Crawford took home another massive sum. Combined, the two made around $200 million from that one fight alone. To put the disparity into perspective, a statistic released less than a week after the event revealed that Canelo and Crawford, by themselves, almost out-earned the entire UFC roster for 2025. Estimates suggest that the UFC's total fighter payroll for the year will slightly surpass $210 million, meaning a single boxing super fight nearly matched what hundreds of MMA athletes collectively earn across an entire season. This comparison reignites long-running debates about pay disparity between the UFC and boxing. In boxing, fighter purses are frequently public and transparent, while in MMA, secrecy prevails. Dana White's organization rarely discloses full fighter earnings, and much of their income comes from bonuses and external deals. At present, there is no clear information on who the UFC's top earner actually is. Some point to Ilia Topuria as the biggest star today, but that does not necessarily mean he is the highest paid. The lack of concrete data only fuels the discussion and adds to the frustration of fans and fighters alike. The contrast between the two sports became even more evident with this super fight. While elite boxers like Canelo and Crawford rake in historic fortunes in just one night, even established UFC champions often need years of activity to approach similar figures. Only time will tell whether Dana White's TKO boxing will succeed in balancing out these differences, or if the UFC will continue to face criticism over how it values or undervalues its fighters.